All right, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. I'm a big believer in doing as absolutely little design as possible. So when I was preparing the slides for the conference, I took that to heart. I'm also a really big believer in Post-it notes. I suspect some of you out there might be fans of Post-it notes as well. Now, I do consider it a really great honor to come and speak to this group here. And the reason why is the very theme of the conference. Motivation. When I look around this room, I see a really incredible diversity. A diversity of people, young and old, some professionals, some students, freelancers, contractors, full-time people. I see men and women from, I think it was 37 different countries. Researchers, interaction designers, information architects, visual designers, motion designers, producers, production artists, art directors, program managers, product managers, even a few developers. We're all here together because we believe that user experience matters. We know that the experience of a product or a service is not secondary, that simplicity, usability, these are not just the coat of paint that you apply at the end. We believe that the user experience is actually the foundation or the skeleton. If the functions of a product or a service are the body, then the user experience is perhaps the soul. You can't separate one from the other. They're two sides of the same coin. Now you think maybe I'm overstating it. So let's consider the bicycle. What is a bicycle? Bicycle is a human-powered conveyance. It gets you from point A to point B. But what's the soul of the bicycle? What is the experience? It's the pumping of your legs. It's the sense of freedom, the play of the handlebars under your hands, the way that you lean into a turn, the wind in your face and in your hair. This bicycle here is the winner of the Tour de France last year. It is hard and unforgiving as a bicycle. It is tight and it is precise, but it is responsive. I look at this bicycle and I can start to break a sweat just looking at this thing. Now, this bicycle is more the kind of bicycle that I used to ride as a kid. When we used to run around our neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. on hot, muggy summer nights, not too dissimilar from the hot, muggy summer nights we're having here in London. And I look at this bicycle and I want to go and get ice cream. The small details make these two different designs perfectly suited to their different functions. One is about freedom. The other one is about speed. Now, as a species, we're pretty good at designing bicycles. The very first bicycles, they weren't so good. There were really technical challenges around gearing, serious ergonomic and usability challenges around simple things like steering, pedaling, even how you'd sit on the darn thing. These were all deep actual design challenges. And they all impacted the nature of the experience that you would have with a bicycle. Some of these challenges required real technical breakthroughs before you could get to the tactile, the ergonomic, even the aesthetic considerations of the bicycle. But today, we're in a pretty good state. My youngest daughter is 3, and she has a bicycle. It's pretty well suited for her size, for her strength, for her coordination or lack thereof. It even suits her emotionally and aesthetically, as it's got this little slot in the front that you can put a Barbie, slide it right in there. Which proves that there's actually room for improvement in bicycles, because if any of you have children, you know as well that if it was really well suited to her, this would be a Frozen-themed bicycle. But our bicycles are going to keep getting better. Many of us here in this room work on hardware and software. We work in digital or consumer electronic experiences. And if I was going to draw the products and services that I use today as though they were bicycles, sometimes it might look a little bit like this. Or a little bit like maybe you've seen this bicycle. There we go. That one. Or even, unfortunately, this one. It's hard to make usable products and services. It's hard to make great experiences. And the fact that it's hard actually motivates me. I'm motivated by this personally because I'm the kind of person that cannot walk into a room and see a picture on the wall that's crooked without having to straighten it. I can't stand the can that's been left on the sidewalk. If you let me into your house, I'm probably going to straighten up the knickknacks on the mantle over your fireplace. If I see something that is wonky or crooked or just plain wrong, I have a need to try to fix it. And when I see that I can work on fixing something, that it can impact hundreds of people, thousands of people, millions of people, I think that's pretty motivating. And that's why I'm also inspired and motivated by all of you in this room. Because you too are working hard to make things better and to make better things. And because we know that it's hard, and because we know that it matters, and because we know that many of the people we work with don't appreciate how hard it is or how much it matters, and we do it anyways, I don't think of user experience as a profession. I think of user experience as more of a calling. We are the people who care about making the world a better place in a small way, in our small way, through the things that we make. We're not feeding starving children. We're not creating new economies. We're not rehabilitating prisoners. We make things. But the things that we make can sometimes help people learn a little bit better, can make people a little bit happier, can bring people a little bit closer. The things that we make can save lives, can make people more productive. We make things. Now the funny thing is, there are a lot of creatures in the world that make things. Some creatures make very useful things. Termite mounds, ant colonies, honeycombs, very useful. And some other creatures in this world make beautiful things, like the shell of the cone snail. Aesthetic, perhaps. Humans are different. We create in a very different way. We think about a goal when we make things. We plan. We try to reach that goal, and we try again. And this is what we call design. This art and science of considered creation. And all the litany of professions that I was chanting out earlier, the researchers, the interaction designers, the visual designers, the tinkers, tailors, soldiers, and spies, all of this together, we do this thing that we call user experience. We come together in groups, in teams, each of us bringing our unique skills. From those of us who see opportunities, provide insight, to those of us who analyze, theorize, propose, to those of us who craft and execute with meticulous attention to detail. Together, we are all part of this creation. Together, we are all part of designing the user experience. In the same way that you can't separate the product from the experience, you can't separate all of these individual roles and advantages from the process of design. And that motivates me. Since you motivate me, I'm going to try my best to motivate you a little bit. Now first, I'm going to try to make you a little bit happier than you were when you walked into this room. Oftentimes, we get together and we feel a little bit unhappy about the state of our profession. We feel unhappy about our tools, the way we work with other teams, the recognition we get, the understanding we have. And I want to tell you that everything that you think you're unhappy about with the state of design and user experience in the world today, it's getting better. It's getting a lot better, and it is an unstoppable tide. And you are part of this momentum. And then after I've made you a little bit happier, I'm going to try to scare you. I'm going to scare you with the sheer amount of work that needs to be done to make better experiences. And the sheer number of places that it needs to be done in. In fact, I believe there is more design to be done than human beings can possibly do. We're going to have to build computers that can do your job, and you are going to help them. And then we'll see if we can't turn some of this happiness and some of this fear into action. So yes, a lot of the experiences we see today look a little bit like these bicycles. And looking around at the state of the world sometimes can feel pretty demotivating. It's like when you've let your room become so much of a mess that you don't even know where to start. Now, maybe I'm projecting a little bit because I just cleaned out my garage 2 weekends ago, so that feels very, very close to home. But I believe it sometimes helps to get a little bit of perspective, to appreciate what we have achieved so far, and to appreciate where we're going. Remember, those very first bicycles, they looked pretty bad too. So, for context, we've only been designing digital experiences for, what, a few decades? I have lived half of my life without a computer. Industrial design, which helps us embody so many of our experiences, as a practice, was recognized only in the last 100 years. That's within a human lifespan. How about the practice of animation, where somebody carefully considers how they're going to transform images or shapes from one state to another, tell a story, to convey emotion, just even to communicate meaning. That was 150 years ago, the first one. On the other side of the spectrum, the term cognitive science, Wikipedia tells me, was first used in 1973. That's the year I was born. William Wundt wrote the first formal book on psychology in 1879. Auguste Comte first coined the term sociology in 1838. The Industrial Revolution was about 200 years ago. Some of these numbers look, okay, pretty big, but let's compare that with something else that we use every day, something that is essential to communicating and to experiences. Writing. Writing, we suspect, started about 4,000 BC. And it took until about 2000 BC to start doing this writing thing on paper. It was actually papyrus at that time, not even real paper. And that was also on scrolls, and scrolls are not the most convenient or handy things. I don't know how many of you have used them. I never have, because they're not convenient or handy. It took about another 2,000 years to get to what we would recognize as a book today, with pages, and the ability to quickly flip through and scan and get where you're going. Now, I'm not saying it should take us 6,000 years to get our act together, but I think we can give it more than 20. The tools and the practices and the skills required to do what we do, these are all very young. So growing pains and learning pains are to be expected. And in every new field of human endeavor, the early days are pretty rocky. The early bicycles, pretty rocky. Early airplanes, not just silly looking, but pretty dangerous. All of the apps and the websites, the services, there we go. All of those things that you encounter that make you feel like this, that should actually make you feel pretty good. Because it means that we are now mature enough in our understanding of user experience to recognize this, to see that things are wrong. I actually believe this is a great time to do what we do. And I believe that things are changing so fast for the better that sometimes we don't appreciate it. It's not just us that can see these things now. Design is more valued by customers than it has ever been before. People want to have wonderful things that make them feel good. And in every industry where the technology has stabilized, it's the design and the experience that provide the differentiation. Whether we're talking about clothing or sunglasses or automobiles, cars I actually think are a great example. You have different price segments and you have different functionality segments, but within each of those pricing and functionality brackets, it's the details of the experience that differentiate the different manufacturers and their perspective. Even when we look at new and disruptive technologies in cars, I think the new electric cars from Tesla are a great example. Now, not only is the technology involved in these cars amazing, but the experience is essential. It's not just enough to bring great new technology to the market. I don't know if you're familiar with the experience of using a Tesla electric automobile. One of the details of their experience is that the door handles retract into the vehicle. So when you actually walk up to this car, there are no door handles. The sides are flush, and then they pop out as you approach. It's like something out of a science fiction movie. And it serves a functional value. It makes the car more aerodynamic when it's driving. That's great. I love that. But at an emotional level, it works even more powerfully because it communicates that when you drive this car, you are driving in the future. After you drive one of these cars, after you try this, the idea of a future of electric cars is not just seductive, it feels inevitable. Design and user experience is valued by business more than it ever has been before. Now, businesses have long flirted with the idea that somehow focusing on the experience and user-centered design is the key to unlocking innovation. And the tech press is obsessed with design. Details of manufacturing of products, typography, user interface are discussed in breathless prose, in paragraphs that are adjacent to discussions of the CPU speeds and memory sizes. Fast Company regularly focuses on design. They have a website where a quarter of its content is dedicated to design. Business Week has a top-level section called Innovation and Design. These are not design publications. These are not user experience academic journals. These are hard-nosed technical and business outlets, and they are all looking to design and experience. In January, I'm sure many of you saw the Design Value Index from a Boston-based Design Management Institute. And they had a partnership with a business strategy firm in the U.S. They profiled the number of U.S. companies that had thriving design cultures. And they mapped them against the Standard & Poor's Index, the S&P Index, and found that these companies tended to have 200% better performance than the S&P. Here in the UK, the Design Council, in collaboration with the Warwick Business School, conducted a study last year of the business impact of design. And this has been an ongoing collaboration for many years. They've shown in the past that investment in design returns a proportional 3 times operating profit. That's 4 pounds of profit for every pound spent on design. And those are the kinds of numbers that make even the meanest of bean counters pay attention. And what investors and academics and big business are slowly realizing and formalizing, small startups have known for years. If you look at every hot new web service, if you look at the top apps in every app store, they're all impeccably designed. Design is no longer a differentiator in competitive markets. It is the price of doing business. Design is valued in organizations more than it ever has been before. I remember when I first heard the term user experience as opposed to user interface. It was kind of a mind-blowing concept. Like, it's actually a thing, like a job to actually pay attention to all these pieces. I thought that was me just, being nosy. I was working at a company called Danger at the time, and it was a small startup that made mobile devices. And I had a team of UI designers, and we were all basically operating this way, shoving our noses into all aspects of the experience. But having it formally defined legitimized us in a different way. And I insisted that we all get new titles and rebranded our group as XD for Experience Design. And it seems superficial, and I think some of the team just humored me, but I think it matters. I think it mattered to get that kind of recognition. Google once famously tested 43 shades of blue. And user experience luminary Don Norman wrote an article saying that that was not design, and that Google would never understand design. And today, I am a VP of design at Google. And testing and validation are an important part of our process, but they do not replace all the other parts of a user-centered design process. I look at resumes today from other companies, and I see VPs of design, of user experience, of industrial design at every major company. I even see chief design officers at some companies. I remember when I first heard the concept of chief design officer, it was like in an editorial, it was like a rhetorical thing, like, doesn't it make sense that someday there should be a chief design officer? You see, I'm making a point. Now it's a thing. 1 month ago, Google held its annual conference, Google I/O. I think this is possibly the geekiest conference in the world. I'm allowed to say that. And this year, a quarter of the sessions were design and experience-focused sessions. There was a whole track at Google I/O, of all places, dedicated to design. The question in organizations is no longer, why do we need designers? Why do we need researchers? Why do we need to worry about the experience? The question is now, how do we get enough? How do we work with them? How do we work best together? Design is valued in schools more than it ever has been before. When I completed my comp sci degree, there were only 2 courses that I remember taking that were even remotely related to UX. User interfaces and multimedia. And they might have actually been the same course, I don't remember. I didn't learn anything about user-centered design in those courses. I did learn about programming, event dispatching, and the input loop for Xmotif, though. And today, you can find UX programs in technical and design schools around the world. Everybody wants what we have to give. They don't yet know what it takes sometimes, and we don't always know exactly the best way to do it. But design, user experience are valued by everybody. And when I say everybody, I really do mean everybody. At Google I/O, I was happy that we were able to announce some numbers that I find pretty darn motivating. We announced that we have over 1 billion 30-day active users of Android. 1 billion. I hear that number, and I think that is a lot of screens. That is a lot of pixels. That is a lot of button presses, swipes, screen transitions, flows. And 1 billion is only a little bit more than half of the estimated total 1.75 billion smartphone users in the world today. That is a staggering number. To put that in perspective, that is about twice as many devices as we estimate that there are cars in the world. That's a staggering number of people using digital devices, having digital experiences. And all of those people want what we do. All of those people need what we do. If you care about the experience, if you care about making wonderful things, there's never been a better time to do what we do. Do you feel good? You feel a little motivated by that? You should. Because change in all the areas that frustrate us is coming. We are part of it. It's inevitable. All right, so now that we're happy and relaxed, it's time to scare you a little bit. Let's see if we can't wake ourselves up, you and me both. Because with all of this opportunity are going to come new challenges. And I know you're thinking, wait a minute, you just told me everything's fine, it's getting better. What do you mean new challenges? All of those things that I just talked about are getting better because we do worry about them, because we are working hard at them. But there are other things that I worry about, and part of the reason why I worry about those other things is because I don't see a lot of people worrying about them yet. I don't see a lot of people working on them yet. Fear can sometimes be a great motivator. So let's start with a really easy one. What I like to think of as the great bringing to life, the animating of everything. Animation comes from the root anima, which is Latin for the essence of life, the thing that imbues lifefulness. So there is a link inherently between motion and life. Today, it is not enough to have a dead user experience. Users expect life. They demand it. And why shouldn't they? Interactive design, by its essential nature, is a dialogue. It is a call and response between a user and a service that is designed to serve them. It is profoundly unnatural to have a dialogue with a lurching, half-animated thing that jumps or starts like Frankenstein's monster. And yet, that's what we've been satisfied with in our experience for the last decade or so. From the web to our smartphones to our tiny digital devices, animation, transition, we've treated them as luxuries. That doesn't cut it anymore. Because between every wireframe that sits comfortably in our interaction flow documents, there are now 60 frames of new screens that need to be drawn. One new drawing every 17 milliseconds. You're going to need some people to animate those screens. You're going to need animators and motion designers. And for starters, it's going to be hard to hire the right people. When I started to work in Silicon Valley, after 3 years of living in LA, I could not hire a decent motion designer to save my life. I had to go down to Los Angeles to find people. And today, I still go down there to find hotshots who've cut their teeth on film title sequences and special effects. Yeah, it's going to be hard to find really great motion design talent, but that's actually going to be the easy part. Because this is going to be the era of the motion designer. And they're coming into these teams that I talked about earlier with the same inevitability that these teams were formed earlier of interaction designers, graphic designers, and researchers. And it's actually going to turn out to be a little uncomfortable for everybody. Now, many of you lived through a similarly disruptive transition before. If we think back to the 90s, many of you here in this audience probably already had successful, decade-long careers. Maybe in print, in publishing, in visual communication. We'd wrapped our heads around the technical intricacies of this new digital desktop publishing, and then all of a sudden, it was time to make websites. And it wasn't just enough to deal with a new set of technical challenges, the limitations of screen sizes and DPIs and browsers and download speeds and compression, all that. We had to learn how to deal with information architecture. We had to learn how to deal with the ways that reading on the screen was different than the ways of reading on a page. We had to learn how to manage navigation and flow that was infinitely more complex than the linear experience of reading a document that was printed. There were new specialists in these fields that we had to learn to get along with. And sometimes those specialists might know about layout or composition or color theory or typography, and more often not. And these specialists, they may have been experts, the best in their field, but their field was so new that everything seemed to change every month. All disciplines inevitably ended up stepping on each other's toes. We were full of brash ideas that seemed great from our individual perspective. Didn't appreciate the impact on the other teams, on the other specialists. We can't have the type that we want on this web page. Why don't we just render it all as images? That way we can get the type right. Right? It seemed like a good idea at the time. The user research tells us we need all 20 of these functions. Why can't we just put them all in the masthead? Surely you can lay that out nicely, right? Cultural clashes, value clashes, it took half a decade to work through as the teams and the specialties that we know today evolved out of older, established disciplines and new disciplines that were just finding their way. And it's going to happen again, because motion design is a discipline that is as rich and as nuanced and as young and uncertain as information architecture was 15 years ago. And they're coming. And if you're not already trying different ways to integrate motion designers into your teams and into your workflows, you're late. You are catching up. Does that make you feel a little bit anxious? Because it makes me feel a lot anxious. I have no idea where I'm going to hire all the motion designers I need to make my team successful. I have no idea how I'm going to change our workflows to find the time for them to do their work. I have no idea what tools we're going to use to successfully convey and capture their vision and their intent and translate that into pixels? I don't know. But we're going to have to. They're coming. So hopefully that's a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of adrenaline in the room. But this is a good challenge. It's the same type of challenge that we've faced in the past. We know how to do this. Maybe, worst case, we're not actively working on it yet. That's bad. But we can do this. It'll take a few years, but we've done this before. So let's warm up to something a little bigger, a little bit less well-charted. What I think is the biggest paradigm shift in what it is that we are designing for since ever. I like to call it the end of mobile. And of course I like really dramatic things. So now you laugh, but I'm actually serious. I think what we think of as mobile is already fading, even as it's barely established itself. What do I mean by the end of mobile? Well, let's start by talking about what is mobile. What do we think of when we say mobile? When I first started working in mobile officially, I didn't even have a mobile phone. I was a tech hipster living in San Francisco. I was coding websites out of coffee shops on my MacBook, or usually my living room. The cell phone was something that those guys in the financial district had. When I took my first job at Danger, though, and I started to work on a connected device, I thought, maybe I should use one of these things. So I got my first cell phone, and I remember it vividly. It was about an inch thick. It was silver, and it flipped open, and I thought it was super cool because it flipped open like a Star Trek communicator, you know. You know what I could do with it? It was amazing. I could make phone calls. There was no web browsing. There was no texting, although maybe there was texting. I didn't know how to do it. Nobody did that. There was no camera. There were no apps. There was no app store. There was none of that. For the longest time, mobile computing meant constraints because we were adding, bit by bit, capabilities onto that platform, onto that very limited cell phone. And when we designed for mobile, we designed with really serious constraints that completely compromise the types of experiences that we could make. The screens are too small. CPUs are too slow. Networks are too laggy. Slowly, this has changed. And we almost didn't notice. And in retrospect, it's easy to look for some big watershed moment or credit something like the iPhone, but the reality is the first few generations of iPhones and Androids and the Palm Trios and Blackberries that came before them, they all suffered from that same overwhelming sense of limitation. It was about what compromises you made. But over the last few years, something amazing has happened. CPUs have gotten significantly better, and now you can get desktop-class graphics performance on mobile. Cameras have gotten significantly better. You really can replace your point-and-shoot camera with a cell phone camera. Memory is cheap enough, finally, that you can keep multiple apps, complex apps, running in memory and really multitask the way that you would multitask on a desktop. Mobile networks in many places are now finally comparable to landline networks, to broadband wired networks. And the screens on everything from tablets to large phones, they're finally big enough. It's totally different. Small incremental changes. And it's not just the apps that benefit from this and have transformed themselves. The mobile web has also really turned a corner in the last couple of years. WebKit-based browsers brought desktop-level rendering performance, and today Chrome on Android is able to do 60 frames per second animation in response to touch, just as smoothly as any app, on a phone that is a year old. Websites no longer offer you this horrible choice between a mobile layout that has half of the functions you want or an unnavigable, zoomed-in version of their desktop site. Now, sure, you can still find them. There's outliers out there. But by and large, we've reached a critical mass of the web working really well on mobile. Basically, if you can do it, you can do it on mobile. Great on mobile. In a lot of cases, better on mobile. You have sensors. You have higher resolution screens. You have accounts. You have app stores and permissions and protection on mobile. And because mobile is now great, people are filling the time that they're not in front of a desktop with a mobile experience. So it's hardly surprising that mobile is where all this growth is. And the trendy mantra has been mobile first, and in some cases even mobile only. These are traps. These are easy, seductive traps. And I think there's two reasons why the conventional wisdom will fail you here. The first is that the rise of mobile, and it really is an amazing rise of mobile, it doesn't mean that the desktop is going away. Research shows that sales of desktops and laptops has been declining pretty dramatically. And some were quick to declare this as a leading indicator that tablets were going to replace this form factor. And for the first few years, actually, the growth in tablets was also pretty spectacular, although that's slowed down as well now. Now, if you look at usage, how people spend their time, we continue to see an increase in total time engaging with digital experiences. Sure, tablets cannibalize some of the laptop and desktop usage, but that's not because they're replacing it. Instead, what's happening is that people are using their devices more. More people are online on their couch because, yes, the tablet is more comfortable for that long-term usage while you're watching TV. More people are connected in their kitchen because, yes, you can prop that tablet in the corner of your kitchen counter. More people are reading their web pages or playing games or reading books on the train because, yes, their mobile screen is now finally big enough to be more comfortable for that. More is the key word here. And the places that mobile unlocks are so many and so varied that they dwarf the time that you're going to spend on the desktop. But it's not a replacement. It's an addition. It grows the total. The second reason why the conventional wisdom will fail you is that there are a whole bunch of new screens that are coming online. There have been a lot of attempts over the last few years, but this year we're really seeing an incredible new momentum in wearables, in automobiles, in televisions. Let's talk about cars. Between the Android Open Automotive Alliance and CarPlay, almost every single major automaker is going to be shipping a connected car in the next 2 years. And the way that these platforms work, by connecting a mobile device, a tablet or a phone, and plugging it in and projecting the user experience onto the screen of your automobile and using the native controls of your automobile to drive it, that guarantees that these cars all of a sudden are going to join the same speed and innovation cycle that we've seen in mobile devices. They're going to iterate as fast as the mobile device iteration we've seen over the last decade. Televisions. We have Xbox, PlayStation, Roku, Fire TV, now Android TV. All of these offer open SDKs for developing apps for the television. And Apple TV doesn't yet have an open SDK, but many companies have formed the right relationships with Apple in order to get apps onto their platform as well. It's been announced already that all of the 2015 high-def and 4K TV lineups from Sony, Sharp, and Philips are going to ship with Android TV. I expect more major TV manufacturers to follow suit. And that means that between future televisions shipping an existing modern OS with an open SDK and a huge variety of set-top boxes starting at $50 US to plug in to an existing television, connected TV is going to be a reality. And of course there's wearables. The last few years have really seen an explosion of the first plausible wearables, everything from smartwatches to fitness devices. Android Wear was announced early this year, and already we've seen 3 devices this year. I expect to see more. And then there's more exploratory devices, things like Google Glass. All of these devices are focused on bringing small, lightweight screens and micro interactions into places that mobile couldn't even go in the past. Mobile couldn't go safely into cars. Mobile couldn't go comfortably and immersively into your living room. Mobile could not fit politely and appropriately into those many glanceable moments in your life. But these new screens can. And all of these new screens, sure, they're going to cannibalize mobile a little bit. Hopefully, there'll be a lot less texting while driving. Hopefully, there'll be a lot less putting of your cell phone on the table at dinner. But ultimately, like mobile itself, these screens are additive. When I say mobile is over, it's not because one of these new screens is the new hotness, the thing that you should be banking on. No, mobile is dead. Not because I want to say long live TV, long live auto. No. You remember, in fact, many of you probably worked on, those wonderful concept videos of the future. These visions of ubiquitous computing where you kind of spend your whole day effortlessly and your digital experiences follow you. They wake up in the morning and you have the alarm clock by your nightstand and it's projected on your fridge and on your coffee table, and it picks up when you get into your car and in your office. It's all one seamless, wonderful experience. They're made by chip manufacturers, OS makers, glass makers. Always the user interface is present in the appropriate way, following you seamlessly. These visions, these videos, are super exciting to us in this room because they erase all of that frustration that we feel when we use the wrong device in the wrong context. Those videos are inspiring. They're uplifting. And it's not some amorphous future. That's next year. Next year, we'll have all these screens in all these places. And getting your product to work seamlessly across all these screens, that's not the job or the problem of, the person you were going to hire to replace you when you're ready to retire. That's your job starting next week, because it's going to take you months to develop and design experiences that work across all these screens and to deploy and develop those experiences. In my experience at Google, thinking mobile first has been a trap. Just even thinking mobile separate has been a trap. Let's look at Gmail. Gmail. It looks like it came from 2 different planets, depending on whether you access it from mobile or you access it from the desktop. The branding is different between the two. The styling is different between the two. The primary function of Gmail, compose a new message. On mobile, it's in the upper right, in gray, represented by an icon. On the desktop, it's in the upper left, in red, represented by text. What are we doing? Is this like some kind of UX practical joke, Buy into Gmail. It's a great product. You just have to learn the UI twice. It's insane. How could anybody decide to do that? Well, obviously, because nobody decided to do that. We had two different teams that were working separately, each optimizing for their own context, each optimizing for their own platform, for their own problems. And every new screen that we add into the mix is going to multiply that problem. We need to stop designing for mobile. We need to stop designing for desktop, and definitely do not start designing just for wearable or just for TV or just for auto. Mobile is over. We need to start designing for people. And we need to recognize that people use all of these screens, and oftentimes they use all of these screens together in sequence or even sometimes simultaneously to complete one task. They cannot be thought of as different products. If you are still designing for mobile, or God help you, your organization is just starting to design for mobile, if your product is organized around technical embodiments or platforms or screens, that would be just as ridiculous as if you decided, hey, I'm going to design Gmail. It has 3 major screens. It's going to have a compose screen, a list screen, and a read message screen. Let's put together 3 different teams. Let's put them in different buildings. Let's have them work on different release schedules. Surely that's going to work great, right? That's ridiculous. And yet the way we design our products, our singular product across screens, is just as ridiculous. And our users and customers are going to be ruthless when it comes to rejecting that ridiculousness. At Google I/O, we announced a new framework where we were trying to give people tools to be able to design across screens one product. But it doesn't matter what framework you're using. A framework is not going to help you if you are not thinking and designing about people first. I hope you're sweating a little bit about that. I hope you're thinking, wow, he cannot possibly be right because I don't have the resources to do that. How am I going to convince the PM organization or the Eng organization that's structured totally differently that we should be thinking about it this way? And I hope at least you're thinking that, because that kind of thought, that's the sound of denial. And denial is the first step of a very important process. Now, some of you, I think, are nodding. Some of you were already thinking about how to juggle all of these screens. Some of you weren't, but you're not wasting any time in denial or bemoaning about how much more difficult this is going to make things. This is not the world we asked for. This is not what we expected, but it doesn't matter. We're going to have to make it work. You're going to have to start evangelizing. You're going to have to start talking about the problem to your teams. You're going to start organizing your team. You're going to start holding strategy and brainstorming sessions in this context. You're going to have to prioritize. You're going to make hard decisions about products and platforms, and there's going to be compromises, and it is going to be messy, and it's not going to be as wonderful a seamless experience at first in many cases, but you're going to make it work. You're going to have to. Because you know the old joke. It says, 2 campers are hiking in the woods, and all of a sudden they encounter an angry bear. And the one camper immediately throws down his pack, takes off his hiking boots, and starts putting on running shoes. And the other camper says, "What are you doing? You can't outrun a bear." First camper says, "I don't have to outrun the bear." Fear can be a great motivator. And I hope this challenge of designing for people, not for screens, motivates you. Motivates me. Sometimes, though, fear can overwhelm us. sometimes too many challenges can paralyze instead of galvanize. And denial is actually a survival mechanism, because it's actually better to be able to deal with some set of problems than to be frozen like a deer in the headlights and not deal with any problems at all. But I believe that if you can see clearly, it is better to do so. If fear doesn't paralyze you, it is better to know the dreadful truth than it is to stumble in ignorance. And that's why I'm going to share with you my third challenge, my personal greatest fear and anxiety. And this is a challenge that is so profound that every fiber of our human psychology recoils against accepting it. A challenge that sometimes feels so fundamentally overwhelming and unwinnable that surely it seems better to ignore. And maybe that's true, but I can't ignore it. Computers are going to take your jobs. The wonderful, creative work of designing experiences. The noble work of making things better, of bringing delight and new capabilities to millions of people. The work of laying out, the work of animating, the work of understanding needs, of understanding efficiency, understanding difficulty, the work of implementing, the work of crafting. Computers are going to do all of these things, and you're going to help them. Now, the first part of this problem, part of what makes it scary, is that you don't believe me. Sure, we have computers that can play chess. That's a neat trick. We have robots that can fold laundry. I'm not threatened by that. I want one. But you don't believe it's possible that a computer can take your job. You don't believe it's possible, first, because if we barely understand how to do what it is that we do, how could we possibly program a computer to do any part of it? You don't believe it's possible because you don't believe a computer can do creative, problem-solving work like we do. So, let me try to scare you. Try not to be overwhelmed. First, let's talk about what it is that computers can do, and let's talk about understanding. Let's look at a few examples. Let's talk about translation. Machine translation software is an amazing thing, and it's happened over the last couple of years. You can input a phrase or a web page in one language, and you will get a translation from a number of different services that will perform complete machine translation into another language. The results aren't perfect, and if you start from very different language roots like Japanese into Spanish, sometimes the results are pretty hilarious. Idiomatic expressions, in particular, tend to be very literal and heavy-handed. But by and large, you can actually understand the gist of what is being said in another language. And it's amazing that we live in a time where we can do this. But what's more amazing, what I find more amazing, is how we do this. We have theories of language, but we don't have a formal system of language, a calculus, a mathematics of even the most basic kind that would allow us to translate from one format to another, like we might translate from imperial to metric. Human translation is an art as much as a science and relies on experience and judgment. And machine translation doesn't work because we have a program that understands language. Google Translate, for example, I'll talk about this one because I know something about it. It uses a machine learning technique called collaborative filtering. And what it does is it finds common patterns across languages. It can provide a translation that's astonishingly useful without understanding the different languages involved. Let's talk about speech recognition. Speech recognition and synthesis have been a thing that UX people and computer science people have been talking about for decades. And in the last few years, it's also made amazing strides. We now have products like Cortana and Siri and Google Now that understand natural language spoken commands and can respond with pretty decent human speech. And again, the biggest breakthroughs have come through machine learning across massive amounts of data. We can transform sounds into text and back again, and it's not because we have a formal definition or understanding of natural language, but because we can build algorithms that learn and perform work without a formal understanding. If you use Google Search, you may have noticed that in the last couple of years we've introduced something that we call knowledge cards on the right-hand side of your results. If you type U.S. President, for example, you'll see a card that pops up. It says Barack Obama, and it'll give you some stats about him, whatever we think is important to know about a president. It's a kind of mini Wikipedia that provides salient information about what we call entities. That is, people, places, things. When you give us a string of text, we can tell the difference between snowman, the concept, and Frosty the Snowman, character. We know that they are distinct, and we know that they have relationships. Now, of course, when I say know, we don't know in the sense that our minds know. I mean that Google's databases recognize these as distinct entities, kind of like different authors in Wikipedia would decide that they deserve their own pages and would be linked in certain ways. But what's amazing about this is that unlike Wikipedia, the knowledge graph is not built manually. It is generated, it is extracted by computers, by algorithms that look at the web and the relationships on it and are able to extract conceptual entities. We don't understand how the human brain stores or recognizes entities, but we can build a computer that does something remarkably similar. Now, you might hear this. Maybe you feel a little stressed about it. Maybe your subconscious is working on this problem, but your conscious mind is thinking, that's great. Computers can be built and trained to do all sorts of tricks of pattern recognition. But pattern recognition is just a component of problem solving. It's not the same as creative work. It's not optimizing for an unknown solution when you only know the goal for your solution. So let's talk about a few more recent developments in machine intelligence. There's a concept called the reinforcement learning framework, which has been applied by machine learning specialists and scientists in the last few years with surprising results. Now, the idea is basically this. You build a machine that is both capable of observing the outside world and understanding that it has a limited number of ways to affect that world. And then you give the machine a goal. And you set it up so that every time the machine tries something, tries to influence the outside world, and the result is a world state that's closer to the goal, that's success. Do more of that. And anytime the machine tries something and the end result of the world state is farther away from their goal, that's failure. Don't do that, or at least not in this time and place. If that sounds a little bit like Pavlov's dog, you've got the basic idea. It's a system that's modeled on how biological organisms learn to influence the world around them. It's a framework for getting computers not just to learn, but to learn the same way that we learn. Last year, a company here in London called DeepMind, who's since also been acquired by Google, presented what I consider some pretty spectacular research. They built one algorithm that could solve problems in a general way, although in a very narrow field. They taught a computer to play games. Not a game like chess, but generically to play games. Computer games. Not the latest 3D games, but Atari 2600 games. You might remember those fondly from your childhood, I do. And even though it's just Atari 2600 games, I consider this a pretty remarkable achievement, because they didn't teach it to play one Atari 2600 game. They taught it to learn how to play any Atari 2600 game. The way they did this was, as an input to the computer, they provided exactly what you or I would get, all of the pixels on the screen. And as an output to the computer, they gave it only what you or I would get, a joystick with up, down, left, right, fire button. They didn't even give the computer any sense of instructions or context about what the game was about. They only gave it one goal: maximize your score. In 48 hours, this program can learn any video game created for the 2600. Radically different types of games: racing games, shooting games, jumping games, you name it. 48 hours is all it takes for the program not just to learn the game, but to master the game, to become absolutely flawless at the game. Better, by far, than any human could ever be. It never dies. It never misses a shot. It never gives up. It never gets tired. It never gets bored. And it doesn't beat the games through brute force or machine endurance. It solves the games. If you're old enough to have played this type of game before, you may remember a game called Breakout, where you have a wall of bricks at the top of the screen and a paddle at the bottom of the screen and a ball that bounces back and forth. And the object of the game is to knock out all the bricks out of that wall. And if you played this game, you probably, if you played it a lot, you probably remember with some satisfaction the moment where you realized you could dig a narrow channel on one side of the wall, because if you did that, you could stick the ball up that channel and it would bounce around on the back side of the wall at the top of the screen. And then you wouldn't have to do any work. You just leave your paddle there and the ball just does all the work for you. And you're like, yes! The DeepMind program discovers this strategy. Computers are learning to solve problems, even when they don't know what the solution to the problem is before they start. Impressed? I am. What if I told you that machines are already starting to design? You may have even worked with them and not really been thinking about it, not realizing it. We all use, many of us use graphics programs, have used graphics programs. And as we drag the objects around on the screen, we get all sorts of wonderful little hints and tooltips that tell us, hey, this element is aligned, this element is not aligned, this element is now centered. It's the computer applying judgment, executing design-centered rules that in the past would have existed solely in your head, might have existed in the draftsman's skill. Of course, we don't worry about drawing straight lines anymore, actually, or having neat handwriting, because again, the computer does all that work for us. In the field of writing, we think of the novelist as a great artist. Of course, they're going to use a spell checker. Of course, they're going to use the grammar checker that the computer brings in. The editor, though, is still an important part of the creative process. They're going to look over the entire story, understand the flow, tell them, these areas could be tightened up, these areas are too wordy. There's actually software now that does things like that. Software that can analyze the wordiness of chapters. Software that can look at the overall narrative and dramatic arc of a piece of prose. Software that can say, this character recurs this many times, or this character only appears once. Why are they a throwaway? Software that can look at and say, you as an author are falling back on these conventional phrases and you need to mix it up a little bit. I only know about this because we use, actually, in my team, some of that same software for the opposite purpose. We use it to take a look at our help and documentation to ensure that every time that we talk about elements of the user interface or we provide instruction to our users, that we always do it in exactly the same way and that we always refer to things in exactly the same way and we use the same phrases. But it's the same software. The computer's already advising us in a lot of places, in a lot of the creative work that we do. And they're already doing more than just advising. Already, the way that we create modern video games and that we create movies relies a lot on the computer doing work for us, creative work. I mentioned the movie Frozen earlier in my talk, and I could tell who was a parent because you laughed. I think a lot about that movie, and it's not just because my 3-year-old has got Let It Go relentlessly on repeat. I think about movies like Frozen or Planes or Monsters, Inc., all these computer-generated movies in recent years. They rely on computers to generate what humans would have generated just a few years ago. And it's not just the menial work of getting the spelling right, doing the keyframes. No. We've been comfortable for a while that you have a lighting designer or a costume designer, and that the shading of each pixel on the screen, well, that's the computer's job, taking input from where the lighting designer put their lights and the costume designer, how they colored their clothing. But it keeps going further. Hair, that's a pain to draw, a pain to model, a pain to manually animate. So let's have the computer help us with the hair. How about clothing? That's also tricky. Getting all that drape right, especially in motion. Let's have the computer help us there. Even in the very objects that populate a rich computer-generated world in the movies that we see. We watch the movie Frozen, there's an exciting chase scene through a forest at night. There was no legion of digital sculptors that planted every tree in that forest and carefully pruned and articulated those tree branches. Algorithms grew that forest, not arbitrarily, not haphazardly, according to strict art direction. Disney has programs to grow forests where part of the art direction is the profile, the character of the trees that will be created. This is a scary scene, so our trees are going to have jagged and foreboding profiles which are off balance and are looming. And the computer diligently creates you a forest of trees that have that character. Later on in the movie, there's a tranquil, very serene scene. So let's generate a forest that is full of shapes that are soft and rounded, that echo the primary compositional shapes of the movie, that echo the primary characters' shapes. The very mountain that is filled with snow and ice, an art director is able to sketch the composition of the mountain, but the details of snow accumulation, the particular weathering of the rocks, this can be generated by the computer for them. Is this really so unlike the Renaissance studios of old? I went to the National Gallery 2 days ago, looked at the Titians and Rubens there. In these paintings, the master composed the painting, decides where the major figures are going to go, and for a price, he'll paint those major figures, the faces perhaps only. But they have a whole studio of supporting painters and artists. There's an expert in drapery and cloth, another one who specializes in exotic animals, another one paints fruits and flowers, and that one paints clouds. Does it make it less of a masterpiece that it is a team effort? Does it make it less of a masterpiece if machines become part of our team? Video games have taken this practice of procedural generation even further, and they've been doing it for years. Game artificial intelligence, by definition, means that even the programmer doesn't know how certain characters are going to react under certain player inputs. Because games are interactive and are essentially about discovery, even as long as early text-based games like NetHack and Rogue, and more recently, games like Skyrim or Minecraft, game makers have been playing with procedurally generated environments, an essential part of the game, not crafted by hand, but crafted by the computer. Recently, I became aware of a game called No Man's Sky, which is a science fiction game of exploration and adventure, and it promises you an entire galaxy of thousands upon thousands of planets. Literally, the developers are expecting that game players, all the game players together, for their entire game and the entire lifespan that their game is going to be played, are going to discover about 30% of the total content that is generated in their game by their algorithms. Now, what's truly remarkable to me about No Man's Sky is not the scope of its ambition. We were afraid this would happen. I got locked out. What's remarkable to me is how they're going about fulfilling it. Can we kill the slides? Because otherwise my screensaver is just going to be distracting. Rather than simply randomizing among a fixed set of variables, like many other of these games have built worlds before, the creators have taken an evolutionary approach with No Man's Sky. And yet, the game has this really remarkable art direction. There's a consistency to the style. It's done in this vibrant pulp sci-fi style that recalls like golden age sci-fi magazine covers like Analog and Omni, and it feels like a Ralph McQuire painting come to life. And it's possible because every creation in this world, from the plants to the animals to the starships, is described grammatically. They don't describe a spaceship as a collection of surfaces and objects. They describe it as a spaceship must have a cockpit, it must have an engine, it must have wings. Don't ask me why a spaceship has wings, it's part of the style. The computer decides how to evolve within these grammars objects that are appropriate to the particular setting. But there is no human whose hand is constructing any of those pixels, any of those polygons. It's amazing. And a little bit terrifying. And it can be terrifying to us on two levels. First, because we are people who care about the smallest details. And giving up control of those smallest details is pretty terrifying. I think that's very similar to a job or to a transition we've all had to make when we realize that we do work on a team, that we are no longer responsible for all of the smallest details ourselves, that we need to learn to provide good and clear goals and provide room for others to contribute and offer their creations. And if some of those others start being machines, it doesn't change the process. And second, it can be a little terrifying because it does kind of challenge our intrinsic role. And it's true, and it can be disturbing. There is a logical continuum between the highest level of creative work that we do and some of the capabilities that we're talking about machines being able to gain. You get the sense of, first the computers came for the in-betweeners, and I was really happy I didn't have to in-between anymore. By the time the computers came for the art directors, there was no one left to speak for us. It can feel a little bit scary that way. But it doesn't change the reality. These near-term capabilities, this automating, helping that's coming for us, yes, we might crack open this door, and we might end up without a job, but we don't have a choice because the door is already open, and it's getting wider every day. We can choose to be aware of this fact and level up the way that we think about all aspects of design, or we can stubbornly stick to skills that can be clearly commoditized by machines. Can be terrifying for some of us, but it can also be exhilarating for some of us. I think of all of those screens, those 1.75 billion screens today. And that's not enough screens because there are 7 billion people on this planet. And they all deserve a screen. In fact, they deserve more than one screen. They deserve a screen on their refrigerator or their automobile or on their desktop, on their television. How many billion screens do we need? I don't know. But I do know there is absolutely no way we can fill all of those billions of screens with great UI using our current techniques. I think of all of the different types of people, young and old, different levels of expertise, different tastes, different cultures. There is no way we can serve them all the way they deserve to be served across all their screens using our current manual techniques. Once upon a time, if you wanted to have a really fine set of silverware, if you wanted the best dining implements that humanity could create, you would go to a silversmith. And he was a craftsman who was trained to make a perfect silver spoon. He would give you a set of patterns to choose from. He would customize its weight and heft and balance for your hand. He would let you choose a style that's good for you. He would monogram it, personalize it just for you. And when you got that spoon, it reflected every stroke, every bit of buffing and polishing, reflected the craftsmanship, the hand of that artisan. But that was not a model for giving every human the best possible spoon that we can give them. It took the Industrial Revolution and the industrial manufacture to generate enough spoons for everybody to eat from, to generate enough spoons and enough styles and enough patterns that everybody could not just have a spoon, but have a spoon that they liked, a spoon that was well suited for them. And these types of manufacturing processes are getting better, and they're becoming more personalized and more customized for each individual. Let's make it more concrete. We're comfortable with the spell checker. Why are we not comfortable with the idea of, say, a visual composition checker? Why is it okay for a designer to generate a mock where something is off by 1 pixel? Why shouldn't the computer check that? Why shouldn't there be a red underline if something is misaligned or misspaced? Why shouldn't the computer understand the difference between mathematical alignment and optical alignment and compensate for that as well? Why shouldn't, in fact, the computer not just check fundamental principles of composition? Why shouldn't it check against the style guide for your company, for your brand, and say, hey, not only is this thing misaligned, not only does this color not match across the other, half dozen screens that you had, but this doesn't match your style guide. This is off-brand. Remember the Gmail example? What if instead of worrying about where to manually put this button for compose on a screen that's 1 inch, on a screen that's 4 inch, on a screen that's 5 inch, on a screen that's 7 inch, on a screen that's 10 inch, on a screen that's 13 inches, on a screen that's 25 inches and 10 feet away from me, or a screen that's 25 inches and 2 feet away from me? Where am I going to put that button? Who's going to draw that mock? Who's going to make that judgment call? What if instead of worrying about producing all those screens, we had to worry about what are the essential attributes of Gmail? What if we say it's about immediate access to composition of a new message and immediate access to the most important unread messages that I have? And what if giving that design direction, that prioritization, the computer could follow a set of rules and figure out where to put the button on all of those screens, or even how to express it through a voice interface where maybe there is no screen, and express it in a consistent way? What if the process of laying out all those screens wasn't just one of translating in a wireframe fashion where the heck that button goes, and then having a visual artist and a motion designer manually churn through the style guide and apply the style guide to all of those screens? What if instead they just worked on the style guide, on describing the style guide in a semantic and programmatic way, so the computer could then take and apply their style guide across all of the screens that the computer generated? What if they just worked on the brand book? If you could do that, imagine how well you could customize things for people. You could even, in fact, create multiple brand books for different segments of your market, for different cultures, for different countries. You'd have the time to do that because you're not spending your time just drawing screens. In fact, You could even programmatically describe the differences between cultures, between market segments, between age segments, and have the computer adapt and generate all of the brand books you need to really suit people's needs perfectly. Every screen for every person could be perfectly generated for them. And that's why we're here, right? That's why we're doing this, to make things better and make better things for people. So when I think of this coming transformation of our crafts from pixel and flow craftsmen to digital directors, perhaps, yes, I mourn the loss of certain skills and the loss of certain crafts. And I'm a little terrified sometimes about my own relevance. But I'm more scared of not doing this. I am scared that without leaning into this, we cannot possibly make things better for the world. Before the Industrial Revolution, cloth and clothing were some of the most valuable items that human technology had been able to produce. Clothing is essential technology, not just for our survival, but for us to be efficient in all of the different environments, places, and roles that we have. And yet it was so labor and resource intensive to make cloth and to make clothing that it was basically impossible to think of a future where humanity was clothed. The reason why we think of the poor or the savage as being unclothed. Clothing was the mark of civilization, an enormous investment in infrastructure. The making of garments was a craft, and each one of them was a valued, unique artifact. And today, we still have abject poverty. We still have hunger. And yet our planet, by and large, is clothed. Clothing has been successfully industrialized and is, in fact, in such ridiculous surplus that style and fashion are basically the only motivators of growth in that area. I want there to be an overwhelming surplus of perfectly designed user experiences, not optimized for 80% of the people, 20% you're out of luck. Optimized perfectly, ideally, for each individual on the planet. Fear can motivate or overwhelm, and the thing that keeps fear from becoming despair is hope. And the optimism I was sharing earlier, the optimism about our profession, about our calling, and what's happening in our world, I haven't lost that optimism. Things are amazing for UX today. And the next few years are going to be an insane, amazing whirlwind, an explosion of new skills in new areas. It's going to be overwhelming and seemingly impossible to keep up with all the new services and screens and interfaces. Science fiction visions of things like Minority Report are going to seem as dated to us as the command line seems today. And along with countless other professions, we are going to be challenged to understand where we provide value in a world where machines can also understand and create and can solve problems. But that's what we do. It's going to be crazy. But there will never be a better time to be a designer. There will never be a better time to impact this coming transformation. We make things better. We make better things. Thank you.